Okay, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here for our Parenting Strategies webinar. If you joined us yesterday with Dr. Falk and Dr. Goldman, welcome back. And if this is your first time, we appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. We're going to be talking about creating structure during unstructured times. I'm Dr. Andrea Temkin. I'm one of the clinical psychologists with the Youth Anxiety Center at Weill Cornell Medicine.
And I'm Dr. Shannon Bennett. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm the site clinical director of the New York Presbyterian Youth Anxiety Center at Weill Cornell. In the interest of full disclosure and solidarity, I'm also a mom and a mom of two, and currently my almost 2-year-old is protesting bedtime. So if you hear her crying, my apologies. I was trying to be distracted by that.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive both of us. Our 6-month-old is in the background, so I'm sure you'll be able to relate to exactly what we're experiencing now. So today is all about talking about scheduling, talking about work-life balance, and we'll talk a little bit about specific schedules for you and your family. We'll talk about how to make this tricky situation where you have to balance full-time childcare and work, how to make that work for you, and also just trying to reduce this pressure to feel like everything has to be done perfectly, given the current situation. So first off, this is a completely new situation. This is completely unprecedented. No one has been through anything like this. And it's really led to a significant disruption in routines, totally new expectations, new modes of learning, new modes of working, new modes of socializing. So it's really a first time for everyone experiencing this. And we're all home all the time, which of course has its own, individual problems. And one of the things that we heard from a lot of you as you submitted questions was this feeling that this is just daunting. It feels impossible to make this work. So we just want to start off by sort of validating that and normalizing. This really is a scary situation. There are a lot of real concerns around health, around financial stability, around our children, around ourselves, parents, loved ones. And it really does feel daunting sometimes. So if you're experiencing that, it's completely normal. It makes perfect sense. Hopefully what we talk about today can help, decrease some of that feeling. So structure. We don't really like uncertainty. Uncertainty can be really scary. And maintaining routines, structure, consistency is really important for all kids. As our routines are disrupted by COVID-19 and the related guidelines, it's important to try and work to build new routines and at home. And we know that predictability and consistency will help kids adjust to this new normal. It can also be helpful in setting clear expectations and remaining consistent. So even in the midst of what feels like chaos, there's some sense of routine and normalcy for your kids. Scheduling is also really important because it helps to make sure we're continuing to do the things that we find meaningful. We know there's a really close connection between our behavior and our mood, and it can be really tempting in times like this to withdraw or isolate or just sort of veg out. And that's completely okay for short periods of time, and it's okay to do here and there. But we know that if you do that consistently over time, it can lead to a negative impact on our mood. So we want to make sure that you're using scheduling to find ways to keep doing the activities that you like to do and that add meaning, so your mood can remain positive over time. That said, what we talk about today, we want you to use the tips to the extent that they're helpful. The examples that we give really are just examples. We don't want anyone to feel more stressed by the schedule samples that we put up or some of the suggestions that we make. And you know your family best. So you can use the tips or guidelines that we have and make them work for you, just taking it one day at a time and adjusting things so that it works for your family, your individual circumstances, and as the situation changes around us. So what should my kid's day actually look like? That was one of the questions we got really a lot. And we're going to show you some examples of schedules for different age ranges, but the general idea is just to think of different types of activities and then come up with specific tasks based on that. So you might have categories like academics, hobbies, creativity, relaxation, family time, meal time, physical activities, and so on. You could think of endless categories. And then within those sort of buckets, you can work with your kids to brainstorm what activities they would want to do, what would come into each category, and then you can really sort of mix and match depending on the day or the circumstance. This is also a really good time to ask your friends and family in the internet for help. There are a million resources out there, sometimes a little too many, it's daunting. So pick one or two resources or one or two friends or family members that you trust, that you feel like, sort of understand what you're going through and experiencing, and go to those places for tips or suggestions and incorporate those in. And then you can also just thinking about prioritizing. There are a lot of different competing demands, and there, are endless categories you could come up with. So think about what's really most important for you and your family. It doesn't all have to get done. So this is a sample routine for an infant or a toddler. And I have to say that last week, as I was starting to look through schedules that people were putting online, they had things like 60 minutes of art time, 60 minutes of reading, 60 minutes of, academics. And I was laughing because my 6-month-old could never last for 60 minutes at any activity. I thought, this doesn't make any sense. But the principle still stands. So when you have younger kids who have shorter attention spans, you still want to create those chunks of categories, and then you're just going to rotate different activities based on that theme. So if I have playtime for an hour, I might spend 15 minutes on the activity mat, 15 minutes reading, 15 minutes with a favorite toy, and 15 minutes taking a tour of the house. So this is your opportunity to sort of get creative with your kids. And, obviously on the schedule, you can see, morning routine, a few different nap times or feeding times, physical activity, creative activity, family time. Adjust those things as works for you. Right now I have family time, in the evening, but I'll say for myself around noon, I'm going a little stir crazy. I need some adult interaction. So that's when I FaceTime with my parents. So, thinking about when do you need these things to happen in your day, what works best for your young one, and adjusting accordingly. Just to give some concrete ideas, sensory activities are really fun for little kids. Sensory bins are really popular right now. And the idea is you can do bins or bags for younger kids and just fill them with sort of everyday household items for your kids to touch and explore. And that's a really good way to maintain their attention for a solid chunk of time. So you can put grains or rice or oats. You can put seashells like in the picture. You can fill a plastic bag with oil and water and food coloring, shake it up. Kids are really mesmerized by that. Add in some glitter, play with different textures, fabrics, pillows, scarves, anything that just gives your kids a chance to sort of explore with a different sense. And you can also do that with taste and with smell. So having a blindfolded taste test with your kiddo, they can try and guess what fruit or veggie you're giving them. You can decide if you want to give your little one lemon and see their little cute squished face. And you can do this with scents, so different flowers, different lotions, different sauces. Your kids can rank, favorite to least favorite. So again, just a chance to sort of be creative and have fun. Music and movement time can also be really fun for little kids. Again, use the internet. There are tons of free music and exercise videos out there geared specifically towards kids. A lot of businesses, small businesses that, used to have in-person classes. Some are offering them on a paid basis online, but a lot of people are doing it for free right now too. So definitely look into those resources. And you can just have fun with family dance parties, family jam sessions. Little kiddos love dancing with their parents. For music time, you can, if you have resources, you can order a small child instrument set that certainly holds kids' attentions, or you can just use household items. So pots and pans are a pretty good classic drum set. You can put dry beads inside a Tupperware as little shakers. I've heard of some families who take an empty cereal box, cut a hole, and stick rubber bands around. You have a little makeshift guitar. So again, do what works for you. If you have resources to bring in some extra things, great, but if not, just use what you have in your house.
Andrea mentioned this already. I'm just going to return to the concept for a moment. The importance of a routine. The goal here is consistency and predictability. And the reasons for this is that we all, adults and kids alike, manage transitions better when we know that they're coming. And we all manage potentially anxiety-provoking or stressful events better when we can prepare for them mentally. And so for kids to have a routine that's consistent and predictable, and the degree of the structure and the precision of that routine can vary, but the goal of that is to help them anticipate what's coming next in their day. So for school-age children, having some sort of visual example of your schedule or your routine, or just kind of what the day might look like, is really helpful for them. It can be in writing if they can read, or using pictures or other visuals can be helpful if they can't read. But as I said, the degree of precision can really vary. So you could have something that looks like the schedule in front of us, and perhaps you have times assigned to each of these different activities where they know what time they're waking up, what the morning routine entails. Young kids really like to know what's being expected of them and when, and then what comes next if they meet those expectations. So thinking together with the adults in your household, what do you want your daily routine to look like? What would you like the flow of the day to look like? What does a morning routine consist of for your school-age children? Something like cleaning themselves, putting their clothes on, putting their pajamas away, and being ready for breakfast. And then moving on to some sort of potentially academic activity or school activity, online courses, or perhaps reading or other educational content from the internet. And then following that with a creative activity, something they might enjoy, whether that's coloring, painting, building with blocks or other materials, writing, music, some sort of science or experimental technology activity. Screens can be a part of this. And then lunch. So kids can help prepare, they can help set the table, they could help you prepare lunch. Following that with a physical activity, taking a walk if you can do that where you are, or doing an online workout, family yoga, or allowing them to do yoga on their own. And then returning to a school activity later on, having free time or choice time where they know what activities they're allowed to choose from. Again, these would be preferred activities, reading, crafts, maybe a child-friendly mindfulness activity, perhaps a virtual get-together with some friends, or screen time if that's a preferred activity that's appropriate for your family. Family dinner with shared responsibilities, and then perhaps an evening family activity that everyone might enjoy, and a consistent bedtime. So this is a fairly structured set of activities, and you could assign rough timelines to all of these. You could also have something that's less precise. Perhaps you keep meal times fairly consistent, and in between breakfast and lunch, you know you're going to do 1 to 2 activities, and you decide ahead of time what those activities might be. And between lunch and dinner, there's 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 activities, and you know one is going to involve schoolwork and the other one might be fun. So it can be more or less precise or more or less flexible depending on what works for you and for your kids. Again, the visuals are helpful, and you'll notice with this schedule, we've ordered the more preferred activities, the things our kids like to do, coming after the typically less preferred activities, or the things that our kids might not want to do as much. So they get out of the way the things that we have to do, and then they get a naturalistic reward by getting to do the things that they're more excited about doing. This is a time, again, for you to be creative, to allow your kids to be really creative. Kids learn in so many different ways. There's a lot of importance right now being put upon the schooling that's happening at home. And yes, that is very important. But it's also important to remember that kids are learning all the time, and they're learning in so many different ways. They learn from playing, they learn from creating, they learn from their school content, they learn from using their imagination, cooking, helping you do a chore, learning a new skill. These are all things that are helping to shape their brain and their development. It's also a really good skill for kids to learn how to feel bored and then learn how to fill their time. That's a really important thing for kids to learn. So that may be something that we're getting better at this time. So stretching our creativity, flexing those muscles with simple crafts, art projects, writing projects, baking or cooking, perhaps allowing them to redecorate or reorganize a certain part of their room or a tiny space in the apartment, dramatic play, dress up, all sorts of different ways for them to use their imagination are all ways that they can learn. When we think about scheduling and routines with teenagers or young adult children, creating your routine should be a more collaborative process. And when we're working with teens and young adults, activity scheduling is a skill that we teach all the time. It's a really important and evidence-based, science-backed skill for mood management in the treatment of depression and to relieve anxiety. And the key to this is to find balance between 5 different types of activities and mix these up throughout the day. So the 5 different types of activities, and this is true for adults as well, that we want to have in our day are things that are just fun, things that we do purely because we enjoy them and they make us feel good. Achievement-oriented activities, these could be academic-focused activities or learning something new or something that gives us a sense of accomplishment when we've completed it. Social activities, so time connecting with peers or other people. Service-focused activities, that could be something as simple as helping out around the house, calling a family member or a relative who's alone, or engaging in some other sort of more service outward-oriented project. And then physical activities, things that we're doing to move our body, to take care of our body. We can include in that bin sleep hygiene, sleeping well, eating well, and certainly exercise. And the key is to find a balance of all of these different types of activities in your day and in your teenager or young adult child's day. One way to do this with an older child is to brainstorm together, have them make a list of what are all of the different types of activities that they could do in each of those categories. And some activities will fall into multiple categories. They may not be mutually exclusive. And then plug those activities into a schedule that you agree upon with respect to what time they're waking up and what time they're going to bed, how much time they're going to spend on electronics. These are things that can be agreed upon and that parents can set some guidelines around those aspects of the routine, how much time is spent on schoolwork versus other activities, how and when the teen or young adult can help out around the house, how and when they can have fun, how and when they can connect with friends, how and when they can get exercise. So this can look different, again, depending on your family and your child. But we have a sample routine for teens and young adults, ideally a consistent wake time that is agreed upon so they're not sleeping all day and staying up all night is important to work towards. Again, you can see here we have more preferred activities coming after the typically less preferred activities like schoolwork or chores. We did receive some questions about, is this time creating night owls? Because we may not have a set time to wake up. Older kids may be sleeping in later and staying up later. I think it is useful to try and have a time, even if it is like an upper limit that they have to try to get out of bed and a time that they have to go to bed. That can maybe be later than it typically is during the school year. Though with remote learning, many kids still have to be, to the screen or to the learning on time. And then when the time comes to return to our prior schedules, we can gradually walk back to our preferred bedtime and our wake time. So if kids, which they will again, have to start waking up earlier to be somewhere and they are tired, they will then also start falling asleep earlier and going to bed easier. So we know things can shift back even if we're being a little bit more flexible with our older children right now. A few other tips in terms of how to make this work for you and your family. With younger kids, we can provide choices to give them the feeling of having some control over what they're doing in their day. That could be a forced choice. So we're either going to do this activity or we're going to do that activity, or we're either having this for lunch or we're having that for lunch, but it is lunchtime. Or it can be an open choice where they get to pick. Or maybe there's a list that they can pick from, or even a grab bag, and they can kind of pick out from that grab bag what the next activity is. We've mentioned with older children, with teens, you're collaborating on the schedule, and that may make them more motivated to follow the schedule if they feel like they have a voice in creating it. A few parents did ask what to do when a child refuses to follow the schedule, or how do we motivate kids to follow the schedule. So giving them some sense of control and helping them contribute to the routine often helps them to feel more excited about complying with it. We certainly can use rewards, particularly with younger children. I mentioned we've talked about how to kind of embed rewards in the daily routine where less preferred activities come before the more preferred activities. So that's a sort of naturalistic reward. If it helps, Kids can earn tokens or points for doing the things that they just need to do, or for allowing you to do the things that you need to do. That's also really important. There's also ways that we can have family goals and family rewards. So there's a couple visuals on the screen, an I caught you being good jar, where you may give out tickets like the ones on the screen. I caught you working, I caught you being quiet, I caught you sitting down, I caught you listening, I caught you working. Family members can give these to each other. Parents can give them to kids. This sort of comes from the concept of very specific labeled praise, which lets our kids know, it gives them positive attention and lets them know what they're doing well, and motivates them to continue to do it. Or if we're putting those tokens or those cotton balls in a jar, the family is catching each other doing well and giving each other praise. When the jar gets filled, then the whole family gets a prize. So there's different ways to keep kids motivated and make it fun, and to kind of just give this sense that we're all in this together. Everybody's working together to try to make home a harmonious place to be if we are all here together all the time right now. It's also really important, with all the family time that we have, to schedule alone time for each member of the family as appropriate, so that we all do have a little bit of time to ourselves to recharge, to check in, to do self-care, and that our kids have that too.
Talking a little bit about your schedule as a parent. How do you actually balance the work with the home situation and the full-time care?
Andrea, I can't hear you. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but your audio got quiet.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you. So we're going to switch gears to talking about, how we navigate this working from home for a lot of families, or working outside of the home, but now having full-time childcare with schools being closed. A lot of parents wrote in, again, just sort of being like, I'm not sure how to manage this. My kids need so much help right now. I'm still trying to do my job. My partner's still trying to do their job. And it raises a lot of questions. How do I find time for all these different responsibilities? How do I prioritize? How do we all manage our competing needs with our limited space, our limited resources? That can be really stressful. So, everything has been shifting so rapidly with the situation that most of us just sort of had to dive right in without thinking about it. So one thing we'd encourage is to really take some time to consider, how would I want this situation to look? It's not ideal, right? No one is excited for this, but this is the situation. So what could be helpful? How would I like it to go? And then see if there are some ways, some wiggle room to make those things possible. So in terms of work responsibilities, this isn't possible for everybody, but some people might have some flexibility at work. So can I negotiate my hours? Can I move them to different times? If I'm usually working a 9-to-5 job, but now I have kids home, can I have a later shift or an earlier shift, or can I move some of my work to weekends? Is it possible for me to shift my responsibilities to things that are a little bit easier to do if I have family members at home or kids at home that I'm caring for, versus other responsibilities that are a little bit harder or demand more attention? One parent wrote in and asked, how do I do Zoom calls outside of nap time? It would be amazing if our kids napped exactly when we needed to have our video conference meetings. But since that's not so realistic, one thing you can think about is, how can I work my meeting schedule into my kids' daily schedule? So if I have older kids who I know have e-learning responsibilities, maybe I schedule my meeting for 15 minutes after that, so I have time to get them going, make sure they're good, and then I know that they're occupied while I have my meeting. It's also a good idea to think about, what are their preferred activities that I know will pull their attention, and maybe I schedule my meetings for when they're on screen time, or I know that they're texting with their friends, or I know that they're doing an exercise video with their sibling. I think another thing that can be helpful is to look for understanding at work. Again, many people are in this situation, including your coworkers, your clients, your patients, your bosses. So I think, to the extent that's possible and you feel comfortable, being honest with your work colleagues about what the new reality is. for full disclosure, I've had multiple meetings this week with my 6-month-old on my lap with my colleagues, and everyone's being super helpful and flexible around that. And is it ideal? No, but again, I think people are trying to make it work as much as possible. It can also be helpful to sort of consider, what do you consider to be appropriate boundaries? What do you want in terms of your time, your space, your resources? So asking questions like, what time is going to be my work time? What time is going to be supervising the kids? What time am I going to grab 2 minutes for myself so I can take a deep breath and recharge? When am I going to sign off for the night? We had people writing in saying, now that I'm home all the time, there's not a physical boundary to when I'm at work and not at work. So how do I keep myself from staying, signed on later and later and later? Pick a time and try and stick to that. Put that into your schedule. Thinking about physical boundaries, if there are any physical boundaries you can create. Some people have a little bit more space in their homes. Maybe they actually have a separate room they could be in and close the door. That's not possible for everyone. Lots of New York apartments are small or tiny. Everyone's on top of each other. So do you have a corner of the room that you can set up for yourself? Do you have a chair that's going to be your work chair? And when you're there, the kids know, your partner knows, you can't disturb me, but when I'm out of the chair, now is the time where you can interact. So even just little things, even if it's not ideal, can go a long way to creating that separation for yourself. And if you're finding it hard to stick to those guidelines, again, set reminders for yourself. When we're asking our kids to self-monitor or schedule or stay on track, we suggest things like, making calendars, creating planners, setting alarms. We all need those same exact tools, especially in times like this that are a little chaotic. We're all a little on edge. Use those tools to your advantage. And then the last thing to think about too is trying to stick to your regular schedule as much as possible. Like we talked about in the beginning, it's sort of easy to let things slide and feel like this is just too much. It almost feels like an extended snow day, even though there are clearly much more serious consequences right now. So do what you can to stay on your normal routine. Have your normal pre-work breakfast, get dressed, stick to the normal lunch hour you had, go to bed when you normally go to bed. Do the things that you always did as part of your regular routine to help you stay on track. We also got a handful of questions specifically around how to interact with your kids during this period. So some people were trying to figure out, how do I get my child to understand the situation or not feel neglected when they want to hang out with me, but I've got to work. Others are trying to figure out just how do I myself compartmentalize as a parent when there's no separation between my different worlds. So, a handful of ideas. If you are in a home where there's more than one caregiver, talk to that partner ahead of time to work out a schedule of who's going to be the on-duty parent and who's going to be the off-duty parent. Know what your different calendars look like on a day-to-day, and that way ahead of time you can think, okay, from 9 to noon, I'm on duty, so no matter what's going on at work, I still got to check in with my kids, but from noon to 4, my partner's on duty, so even when my kid is whining or I hear them negotiating or they're throwing a tantrum, I don't have to be responsible for that. My partner's got that going. It's also helpful to create break times where you and your kids know you're going to be on pause. Like Dr. Bennett mentioned, expectations are really helpful. So if your child knows, mommy's going to be ready to hang out at lunch, or daddy's going to be free when the clock hits 3 p.m., it can make it a little bit easier for them to be patient while they're waiting for your attention. And the other thing to think about is, can you use visual aids? A lot of kids do better with some sort of visual cue. So if you have a separate space, maybe the rule is when the door is closed, you can't disturb mom or dad, but when it's open, you can come in and talk to me even if I'm still working. If you don't have a separate room, you can use a sticky note. When the red sticky note is on the laptop, I'm in a meeting, you can't ask me questions, but when I pull it off, you're welcome to come talk to me.
I just wanted to note, I noticed some of the questions coming in through the chat. So one question was, will we get copies of the PowerPoint or access to the recording after? And I want to, in case people need to sign off, I just want you to know the answer is yes. We'll be posting this on both the website for the Youth Anxiety Center and the website for the Pediatric OCD, Anxiety, and Tic Disorders Program. And I believe both of those websites were on the title slide and I think on the Q&A slide, but you can also Google NYP Youth Anxiety or Weill Cornell POCAT, and you'll find access to the slides and the recordings. There's another question about managing schedules of multiple kids. That was a pretty common question, and so we embedded that in the Q&A, and we'll address that in just a few minutes. So a few other tips to balance work and family. This came in the Q&A too. How do I manage expectations from school if I think there's just too much? They're asking too much of me. And we can ask, you can ask the school or the Department of Ed or the teacher, ask the school for tips. Ask them to help you prioritize what's most important to get done, or see if they offer any additional support, perhaps through school or other resources. There may be some virtual tutoring or some other virtual resources that you could use to support the home learning and the homeschooling that's happening right now. Also thinking about who in your network can be called on, even if that's virtual, to have another pair of eyes if it's through the computer, to talk to your kids or pay attention when you need to get something done, or to help you think through a problem at work that you're just feeling stuck on, or absolutely to lean on when you're just feeling like you're at your wit's end and you need some support. We really all need to be relying on our network and our support system more than ever right now, especially when we're feeling physically distant. We can still be socially connected. And Andrea mentioned this, but I'll just reiterate that everybody is figuring this out together, right? We are our partners, our friends, our kids, our employers, the teachers. Many of us are in the same boat. So look for opportunities to support each other and problem solve together. If you feel comfortable, as Andrea mentioned, being honest about the difficulty you're having, balancing all of the challenges that you're being presented with right now. Talk with your workplace about that if you have that opportunity or that flexibility, especially if you can come to them with some sort of creative solution to offer them some options, not just letting them know there's a problem, which we all know, but thinking about what works for you and then sharing this with your employer, what you need and how you think you can get this all done, perhaps with a little bit of creativity or flexibility. This might be a new era for workplaces moving forward, where everyone's starting to understand that there are different models of participating both in our work life and our home life. And I don't use balancing because it's not really a balance. It's we can participate in typically one thing at a time. Andrea also mentioned, having on times and off times, and if you do have another caregiver in your home, trading off with that person. And sometimes that does mean we have to trust that person and let that person do the job when we're not on, even if it's different than how we would do it if we were on. So letting go of some of those expectations or responsibilities and not feeling like we have to do it all the way that we used to do it is important.
And just to address one of the questions that came in about, well, what do you do when you're a stay-at-home mom and now you have so much more to balance? And I think, these same principles apply. It's so hard to do all the normal things in your day-to-day, and now your child is home full-time. So going back to these same ideas, who in your network can you call on for support if it's possible? There's another question about what do I do if I'm a single parent? Is there anyone who can help entertain your kids, even if it's virtually? Are there neighbors who you know are social distancing appropriately or self-quarantining that may be able to pair with you? If not, it's understandable, but thinking of, is there any way, any flexibility? And then when you don't have those options, how can I create this schedule so I can optimize times when my kids are engaged with other things, when they're asleep, when they're lounging around or watching screen time to do what I need to do. And that might involve, again, some rewards, some incentives to keep them motivated so that you have some time to do things that you need to take care of as a parent when you don't necessarily have someone else who can help with that.
There's also a question about how do we talk to kids about what's going on right now. So yesterday's webinar specifically addressed that question, and we can maybe try to address it a little bit in the end, but you can also access that webinar and that content. There's a lot of discussion in yesterday's webinar about child anxiety, about what's going on and how do we talk to kids about what's going on right now. So a few more tips about structure and routine and how do we do what we're being asked to do in a day. One parent asked how do we best create a schedule but still be fluid? We've mentioned this before, but we can be flexible. Structure is important. We've talked about why it's important, but it is okay to modify. And if an opportunity comes up to say, you know, we're not going to follow this schedule today, we're going to do something else, it's okay to follow that and have some flexibility when you need it. We all need to practice patience and allow for an adjustment period and allow some time for everyone to get used to these new routines and know that everyone's getting used to it, including our kids. And so there was also a note about this in the chat. Our kids' behaviors and emotions may reflect that may be how they're communicating, like, I'm not feeling so comfortable with this. So yeah, we're going to see some different behaviors from our kids than we may be used to seeing, which just makes this all the more challenging. And more important to practice patience with ourselves and with them. This is a new situation for all of us. And we need to be kind to ourselves and to others, knowing that this is not a time for us to be expecting perfection from ourselves or from others. I have a friend who's talking about, you know, I'm just looking for one win each day. It doesn't matter what it is, it's just one win, one thing that went well. Perhaps this could be a family activity at dinner time, having everyone talk about one thing that they liked from the day, one thing that they enjoyed and that went well. Our emotions are all really heightened right now. And so we need to make sure that we have a little bit of extra time and attention to focus on our emotions and know that we may be feeling a little raw. The people that we're interacting with, the people at work, the people in our family, you know, there's a lot of feelings and a lot of reasons to be patient, be flexible, and be kind as much as we can. We don't need to do it all. We've talked about this again, but we can slow down. We can be present in the moment. One person asked, what is reasonable to expect right now from a child or from an adult? Again, our expectations are just going to be really different because we don't know what to expect. This is a really different time. We don't, you know, we're all getting used to it. We don't need to be able to do everything, and certainly not doing it perfectly. We can make practical choices. If our kids don't have to wake up as early as they used to, that's okay. They can sleep in a little bit more. If their work is not as up to the standard that we typically want it to be, that's okay. If our work is not up to the standard that we typically want it to be, that's okay too. We'll have opportunities to make this up. It's okay to adjust our expectations and make some changes to our typical house rules. It's also important to decide, like, what are the house rules that you want to maintain? And you get to make that decision. Parents can agree, you know, what do we need right now to make our house harmonious and to make this, you know, as doable as possible, and focus on what those one or two things are that you really want to keep boundaried and consistent with. And I've read this and heard this in other interviews, but I think, you know, we're in a time of, this is a global pandemic. This isn't something we've experienced before. And it is a moment in history that we will at one point look back on. And so what will we remember when we look back on this time, and what will our kids remember? And we probably won't remember the exact amount of screen time that we allowed our kids to watch. You know, that I don't think that those are the things that we should be focused on when we think back on this in history.
All right, so a bunch of you submitted questions, which is amazing. So we apologize in advance. We're not able to get to all of them, but we'll try and get through some. And if we have time at the end, we can try and take a few more. So Dr. Bennett already addressed this a little bit, but how do you relax house rules now and then plan to tighten them up later? Again, I just think being open with your kids. We're changing things right now because the situation has changed, but as things, you know, adjust back over time, we might go back to other rules, or we might change things up. You can expect when that happens to get a little pushback. I'd be shocked if your kids were really excited about decreasing their screen time in 3 months, but that's fine. You're still the parent. You can decide what you're comfortable with, and when you need to change things, you can change things.
Another question that came up a lot and also came up in the Q&A chat: how do you manage children who are different ages and at different developmental stages of what they're able to do? It's a really tough thing, in addition to having to manage work and their school and household responsibilities. If it's, you know, different levels of school, it's hard. It's just really hard. one activity that may be fun to try. Sometimes you may not be able to do this all the time, but perhaps you have an activity where the older child can teach something to the younger child, or they can help each other with something and take turns being the leader. Older kids love to be the boss and show their little siblings how to do something, whether that's a craft or some schoolwork. So that can be one way to engage them in a similar activity, even if they're doing it on different levels. Sometimes if your older children need to be focused on schoolwork, but you have a little one who's not in school, we have to balance our schedules and our needs, perhaps with your partner, like we've talked about, or if you're alone, perhaps you're rotating screen time, or you're using a favorite toy or a favorite activity to occupy the little one while you help the older one with schoolwork, and then you switch. You ask the older one to hold their questions till a particular time when you can then kind of go run through it all while the little one's napping. Again, none of these things are going to be perfect, but we're doing the best with the time and the options that we have.
There are questions about how do I keep consistent with structure. I think visuals are helpful. I think, plotting it sort of ahead of time can be really helpful. Again, using those reminders. And I also think remembering, why is the structure helpful? Why did I put it in place to begin with? And thinking about, when it's tempting to let things slide, does that work for my family? Or do I know that people actually do a little bit better in the long run when we stay consistent? And if there are real reasons why structure works better for your family, remembering that can help sort of give you the motivation to stay on track when it's really tricky.
Many people asked about how do I manage with a child who has more significant difficulties related to special needs or ADHD or a mood disorder or anxiety or behavioral dysregulation. Again, this is hard. This may be another opportunity to use your supports virtually. If you have therapists that you typically work with, are they offering in-home virtual care that you can access right now? Are there aspects of your IEP or the supports that you were receiving in school? I think those are pretty hard to come by right now, but are there ways that you can try to work that into what you have at home, or talk to the Department of Ed about any additional support? Is there safe ways that you can get additional in-home support? That may be something to look into. Establishing routines is even more important for kids with special needs and kids with ADHD and kids with anxiety. The predictability and consistency is that much more containing for their emotions and their behaviors. So it also sometimes can make it that much more challenging, but it can be a really helpful thing to put some effort into, as I'm sure you all are. And if you have coping strategies that have been helpful for your child in the past and coping strategies that are helpful for you, this is a time to be practicing those and reviewing those. So if you've had therapy in the past that was helpful, if you have resources online or resources from old therapies that you can get out and review for yourself or for your child, now would be a really good time to do that, to access any of the old coping strategies that have been helpful. Keep practicing those.
We're also going to be doing a whole webinar next Tuesday on parent coping and conflict management. So if this is something that's at the top of your mind, or you or your child is having difficulty controlling stress, absolutely join us for that one as well. Just a few more questions. So how do I manage all these competing responsibilities when my family has limited resources? So I have one computer for 3 of us, or I have limited funds. I think it goes again back to the idea of working with what you have. If you have extra resources and you can pay for virtual tutoring or virtual music lessons, or you can, buy some new toys for your kids, awesome, that's great, but that just isn't realistic for many families, and that's totally okay. Use what you have. Again, this isn't the time to feel like I have to go above and beyond. And in terms of, well, how do I allocate different things, computers, quiet time in the one bedroom that has a door for all these different people with different needs, I think, again, going back to that idea of scheduling. So what are the must-haves for each of my family members? Maybe everyone has a list of 10 things, and it's probably not realistic for them all to get done. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that everyone really needs to do? And how can I make sure that they have the time to at least do that? If there's extra time, great, amazing. But no need to put extra, pressure on yourself to feel like every single little item on the list has to get done perfectly. Again, this is really about just doing what works right now.
There was a question about how do we prioritize what school is recommending. It's too much to do. I spoke to this briefly before, but perhaps you can get feedback from the school or from the teachers on how to prioritize or ask for flexibility. Again, everyone is figuring this out. I know teachers, I know school administrators who are still trying to figure this out, school systems, parents, kids. Hopefully everyone can practice patience, flexibility, and forgiveness with each other if it's not getting done and if it's not all perfect.
There's a question about how do I get my kids to follow limits around bedtime or screens around when everything around our routine has changed. Dr. Bennett spoke to this a little bit before in terms of, you can use certain rewards to get kids to follow schedules. And many of our house rules around screens or bedtime have been relaxed. But again, at the end of the day, you can use the same strategies you've been using all along to enforce certain limits. So if your kids really want to keep pushing bedtime later and later and later, like at some point you can shut off the Wi-Fi, you can take their phone charger. There are a million apps out there. There are browser extensions that you can cut off access to different websites. So you're welcome to use those sort of typical things. If they're staying up later and later, make it a little more boring for them. They don't get all their toys and their books and their phone. If they want to stay up, fine, but you're going to be sitting in sort of a dark room until you're ready to go to sleep. So you can use all the same strategies that you have been before, even though some of those things have been relaxed. And like we talked about previously, there are some fun things about this. So if your kid isn't excited by the idea of a later bedtime or more screen time, use those as rewards for the things that they need to do during the day. If they can let you get your work done, for these certain hours, then you'll allow them to stay up 15 minutes later. Or if they get all of their e-learning done, then they can have extra screen time today. So use that excitement to your advantage here.
Another question, I'm sure many of us are feeling it. How do I cope with the guilt around being too focused with work or loosening rules too much at home or not enough focused at work? Please try to let go of the guilt if you can. I've said it before, but practice forgiveness with yourself. We all need to be practicing self-care and self-compassion. We are facing a global pandemic that is being compared to a world war. If you feel like you're in survival mode, it's because we kind of are. And it's important to allow ourselves even momentary breaks from the stress and strain of those uncomfortable emotions of anxiety and especially of guilt. If you are able to do that, I know it's hard. We're being asked to be parents, employees, employers, teachers, all at the same time. That is not possible to do perfectly. You're doing the best that you can, and that is enough. And how do we practice, how do we practice letting go of these unhelpful emotions? Well, some of you may be familiar with the principles of mindfulness, and there are a lot of resources and tools for practicing mindfulness that you can look for. But there's two principles of mindfulness, and one in particular I think about a lot, which is non-judgment. Being not judgmental about how we're feeling in this moment. So if we're feeling anxious or we're feeling like we're failing or things aren't going right, can we let go of one layer of that emotion? So letting go of the guilt about feeling anxious or about feeling angry, right? We can start to peel off layers of emotion. So if we know we're already feeling bad about something, trying not to feel guilty about feeling bad or feeling anxious because we feel guilty because we feel bad. So just trying to be non-judgmental with ourselves. And the other aspect of mindfulness that I'm focusing on a lot right now is being in the present moment. So mindfulness is a way of being aware in the present moment and trying to be non-judgmental about what's happening. There's a lot of uncertainty, as we've talked about, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of the things we're worried about are things that could happen in the future. But if we just focus on what's happening right now, we can anchor ourselves in the fact that right now we're doing the things that we need to do. We're trying our best, and that's enough.
All right, so we are out of time. I apologize if we didn't have a chance to get to your question. There is a feedback form that you'll be sent to at the end of this. So if you have additional questions, feel free to put that in. And if you put a contact in that feedback, we'll be happy to get back to you with resources or referrals. Like Dr. Bennett mentioned, this will be available on the website. I can actually show you what that will look like. So you can go to either Youth Anxiety Center website, or alternatively, you can go to the POCAT website and you can see all of our webinars. You'll have access to the recordings on the Youth Anxiety Center website. You can click this little tile and that will take you to what you need. Okay.
And we have 3 more webinars next week, so we may answer your questions next week. They may be embedded in these topics, or we'll look through your questions and try to incorporate them into maybe these topics or future webinars as much as we can.
All right, thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate your time. We hope this was helpful. Please fill out the feedback form afterwards to let us know what other future topics might be helpful. Again, any questions you might have, and we will look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.